Hello, model people. Welcome to this edition of Model Moment. In this show, I'm going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to present a series of models. Instead, we're going to recap some of the comments and feedback I've received from you on various shows of recent months. So some of you might remember my most recent show happened to be on Russian and Soviet era models. I love Russian models. I love collecting Soviet era and Russian models. They're so beautiful. They're absolutely, well, what I consider to be some of the best models ever made. And I explained that by giving a very detailed tour of the models from Russia and the Soviet Union in my collection. Anthony Lawler, who's been a collector of travel agent models going back to the 1950s, said that I really do need to compare and explain the difference between travel agent models and these Russian models that I presented. So I'll read Anthony's email to you. He says, Henry, I think you've got to differentiate your Russian editions from true travel agent models. Yours are much too detailed to survive in travel agencies, but old ones were much more robust and less detailed. They are lovely models, but fragile. They are well done, but they are collector models. They are not travel agent models. Anthony, thank you very much for pointing that out. And I will now further elaborate on this point here in this video. Anthony is a purist collector. He's been collecting travel agency models since he was a young boy living in Rhodesia in the 1950s, visiting the BOAC offices and asking the BOAC manager how he might get the BOAC ticket models to start his collection. And he believes, rightly so, that these are different animals. Travel agencies had beautiful window displays, and they were often accompanied by models that were presented by the airlines. Airlines had companies under contract to produce these lovely models. Some were cutaway, some were not cutaway, and the models showcased the airlines to the traveling public. And that is what we call a travel agency model. They weren't sold to the public. You couldn't buy them anywhere. And a lot of us that were growing up back in the 50s and 60s, we were in the travel agency windows admiring these beautiful models, but unable to get a hold of them for decades, really until the internet came and provided a venue for us to buy and sell models. These models from Russia are made by specialist companies that cater to the collecting needs of very high-end collectors, such as yourselves and myself. And some of these Russian models are made by AVIATION. AVIATION is a Russian government enterprise. They are tasked with the marketing and sales of Russian-built aircraft in foreign markets. And the AVIATION models include the large 1/50th scale models that I showed in my presentation. The models that are made by AVIATION, they're also not travel agency models. They're not made for travel agencies. They're made as showpieces, typically during an air show, and they would have all the models showing the various aircraft that are made in Russia. And sometimes people were able to purchase these models back in the day and would be lucky enough to own these models, but they were not travel agency models. Daniel Fraureip Ichihara also made the comment to me that I should specify that AVIATION were the maker of particularly the large models from Russia. And also, even that Tu-154 model, the Aeroflot Tu-154 model that I had that was on the triangular base is most likely an AVIATION model, not a design bureau model. A design bureau model is a model that would have been made in the model shop of a specific design bureau. Now, the Antonov 225 model that I showcased in the video, made of wood, very detailed, that is definitely a design bureau model and would have been made by the Antonov Design Bureau and not made by AVIATION. So I'd like to thank both Anthony Lawler and Daniel Fraureip Ichihara for pointing out these interesting facts so that I can share them with you. Several weeks ago, I also published a video called Model Seller's Biggest Mistake. I pointed out that sellers of aircraft models need to put prices on their models because there are certain websites and certain sellers that have this, in my opinion, very incorrect marketing tact of not putting a price on their models, and they just say, you know, serious offers invited or make offer. And my view is that's not how you sell a model. One of our viewers, who's a good friend of mine, said, Henry, you do need to explain the difference between selling to professional collectors and selling to people that don't know anything about models. So he made the important distinction between marketing in an environment like Facebook versus a specialist marketing to collectors through websites or special newsletters that I send out. And he is very correct. Absolutely, I totally agree. If you're listing a model for sale, for example, on Marketplace Facebook, most of the people on Marketplace Facebook, or many of them, know nothing about models. And if you put a price of $600 on a model, they might think it's too ridiculous. And it's just best to say, please contact me if you'd like to discuss the price of this model. So in that particular scenario, it makes sense not to put a price because you just want to separate the wheat from the chaff. If somebody's interested in a model, you can invite them to contact you to discuss the model and the pricing. Andy Reeves Roberts from the UK sent me an interesting email, which I'll read to you now. He writes, Henry, I have a large Concorde, 170 centimeters long, with a tripod, in British Airways livery made by Westway Models, as well as another BA Concorde with stand that's 85 centimeters, and a British Airways 747 with stand that's 70 centimeters. They are in pretty good condition. I'd like to sell them. I'm not sure of the value. Can you advise me on how best to sell my models? Well, on this particular case, I think this is something that I've discussed at length in my book. And for those of you that don't have my book, I published the Aircraft Display Model Collector, Investor, and Appraisal Guide, and I talk about large models in detail in my book. Models that are huge tend to have low values. And why is that? That's because these models are very hard to transport, they're very costly to transport, and most people don't have the space for them. So while these models cost thousands of dollars back in the day, and airlines paid $5,000, $10,000 for a cutaway model, that does not reflect anywhere close to what the present day values are on these models. Because they're so difficult to transport, the number of buyers that have the space for them are few and far between. The values of these models are actually quite small. Now, he's in the UK, I'm in Canada. My view is that he needs to find a buyer that's in the UK that can ideally come and pick up the models. So what I suggested to him was that he could try a listing on eBay open the models up, say at $100, and let the market decide what the value is. He wanted to get rid of the models and not mess around with, having the models sit on a website for 6 months or a year or 2 years. So definitely the best course of action is to put them on eBay, list them at $100, and let the market decide. And that would be my advice to him. And I hope he does well in finding a new home for those models. Robert Watson sent me an interesting message in that his son is a pilot on the KC-135 and he'd like to find a KC-135 model to make a gift for his son. So let me read you his email. Great presentation, Henry. Thank you. I never thought to ask before, but can you recommend a good display model of a KC-135? My son is an Air Force pilot and I'd like to find a nice model for him, but I don't know even where to begin. Robert, the KC-135 is a beautiful aircraft. Of course, it's a military version of the 707, and the KC-135 is not too popular in terms of models. 707 models, a lot more common. KC-135 models, less common. He could purchase easily at low cost a Philippine model from one of the dozens or hundreds of sellers that exist on eBay. This would not be my recommended course of action. I think those models are a waste of money. I don't think they're going to appreciate in time. In many cases, I think they're quite ugly models. So I would have steered him into a bit of a different direction. You do have some other very good options that I'll explain to you. Depending on your budget, The Rolls-Royce option would be to go for I would call it the Rife or the Pacific Miniatures round ashtray style model that was made in the 1950s, also in the 1960s. These models are about yay long. They're on a highly polished base, and they were made by both Pacific Miniatures and AIRLINERS and Vic Petushin. I think all of these three companies shared the molds amongst themselves over a 20 or 30 year period. These models in nice condition typically will sell in the $500 to $600 range for a really nice specimen. For a lesser specimen, probably in the $300 range. And if you want one maybe with missing engines or damage, in the under $200 range. They do show up on eBay on a fairly regular basis, but to find really pristine ones, you do have to be patient. And again, I think you're going to have to budget in the $500 to $600 range for a real beauty. The next option for you would be the 1/100th scale fiberglass KC-135 model that was made by Pacific Miniatures back in the 1960s and 1970s. Sometimes they would have various blisters and whatnot. So it depends on what kind of KC-135 your son is flying and whether you wanted to get a model with or without various bulges and beacons and domes. But these models are usually on eBay a few times a year. Typically will sell in the $300 range. Sometimes sellers do ask over the top prices for them, like in the $500+ range. I would tend to avoid that. Good luck in that search, Robert. I'm sure you'll find a very nice model for your son. Hans Sandstrom from Sweden sent me an email saying that he was very much impressed with the Russian models presented in my video. And he wrote, "Good morning, Henry from Sweden. Your YouTube presentation on the Russian models was absolutely amazing. It was stunning to see so many of these in bigger scale." And Hans did send me a number of interesting photos from his collection, which I will share with you now. Hans impresses with this very beautiful 1/100th scale Aeroflot TU-134 model. This is most definitely an Avia export model, similar to my TU-154. Notice the trademark triangular base. Notice this beautiful model also on the same triangular base, another Avia export model, this time in the form of a TU-204. The 89 designation on the wings tells us the model dates from 1989. Did you know that Pachmann made models for Aeroflot of Russian types? They did the entire fleet in the early 2000s. This is a 1/100th scale TU-154 made by Pachmann with plug-in wings. I've actually owned one of these models in the past myself. Although not technically a display model or travel agency model, this is certainly a unique piece, also sent in by Hans. It's a beautiful porcelain model of a Yak 40. It's made by the Russian porcelain company Gazelle, and it's in blue and white porcelain with some gold and special items. It's definitely a very rare piece. It's a unique piece, and very special thanks to Hans for sending in these wonderful pictures. They're very much appreciated. You can send your model shots to Henry at aircraftdisplaymodels.com, and we'll look forward to featuring them in a future video. Well, the first model in our auction roundup section of the video is this Beechcraft factory model of a U.S. Army C-12 or Beech King Air 200. The seller advertised the model as being made in England. He didn't state the size, but it appears to be roughly 1/50th scale, although it was expressed as being made in resin. So the model sold on January the 11th, 2022 for $316 US. It's an attractive model. It's accurate, probably Westway or Skyland models. Quality of workmanship here is definitely really good. The model presents well. It looks like we've got some metal props and exhausts, which certainly do add to the beauty of the model. And I would say that this is pretty much par for what this model would be worth, somewhere in the $300 range. Our next model is this 1/50th scale Verkyle F-27. The seller listed it as a 1950s Verkyle 22-inch wingspan vintage Fokker Friendship model. And it did sell on the 9th of January for $511 US. Now, pros and cons. The pros, the model's in great shape. There's no bends that I can see. The actual finish to the model is really good, and it does have its original stand. Cons, of course, the color scheme is non-existent. So in my view, this model is to be refinished. I think a lot of these were produced in this white generic Fokker House livery. It's not too inspiring to me. I think the model's value increases drastically when it is refinished into an airline livery. So the buyer here paid a little over $500, probably another $100 for shipping. So it's probably coming out at around $600 US. And by the time the model is repainted, it's going to be a $1,200 to $1,300 investment for the buyer, somewhere in that price range. So I don't think it was a screaming hot deal, but at the same time, I don't think the buyer overpaid. If it was me bidding, this would certainly be the top of the envelope for me on this model. And I do see these quite frequently on eBay and, of course, amongst other collectors and in the community. So there you have it on this particular model. Good looking model, price was top of market. So what we have here is a made in France Nord 262 in the French Navy livery. The model was made by Reducta, which was a French company operating in the 1960s, and the seller advertised the model as made in France with box made by Reducta. The scale I'm going to call around 1/100th scale. The model appeared to be around, well, several inches in length with maybe a 10-inch wingspan, something in that range. It has a model kit looking appearance to it. The finish, I would say, is on the lesser side. And the model did have a fair bit of decal loss on the other side. Now, for me, I consider this model, it's just, again, about the level of presentation and beauty in the model. Yeah, it may be a $100 model, I think. If it was finished to a higher standard, the value would be higher. But I was amazed. The model sold on eBay on December the 30th of 2021 for $257 US. So I would consider that to be a very rich price for this model. Reducta made many models of the era for French airlines, French military, French industry back in the 1960s. And I haven't seen too many of the Nord 262s just because I'm not that close to the French market, but I do believe the production numbers are on the higher side. So this was listed on the American eBay, and I think the $257 price was definitely on the very rich side for this piece. Okay, this is an interesting piece. It's a 1/72nd aluminum Lockheed Constellation, as we can all see. The seller basically indicated with his keywords in the listing that it could be raise up, could be verkile. And he did get a bit of initial bidder interest, which seemed to taper off towards the end of the auction. We didn't see a rapid escalation in price at the end. And I'll give my comments on the model. I think the buyer did not pay attention to the accuracy of the model. The nose is a million miles from accurate. Look at the windows, the front cockpit windows. They are actually quite grotesque in my opinion. It's just a slice down, and that's not, I find it distracting actually. So this is not a model that I would be interested in owning, nor could I recommend it unless, of course, it came with a steep discount. And by steep, I mean probably 50% of the value of a real verkile or a real raise-up Constellation model. Who made this? I don't know. I honestly don't. But the cockpit windows are just so distracting to me that I would not touch this model for my own collection. So just as a comparison, I'm going to show you what a beautiful Lockheed Constellation cockpit and window section looks like. This is one of my own models. It is, I believe, a Lockheed factory model, but you'll see that the nose looks absolutely fantastic, and the cockpit windows are just bang on perfect. So that is a model worth owning. But this one that sold on auction, I would steer any serious collector away from. It did sell for $576 on November the 1st. And I do consider that to be absolute top of market because there is no stand and the model requires complete refinishing. So here we have a 1/50th scale Space Models Virgin Atlantic 747-200 model. Very attractive looking model. It is a standard Westway models or space models pattern with the plug-in wings. These were produced in very large numbers for decades in various airline liveries. Now, the model sold on October the 12th, 2021, and it achieved a final price of £630, which is in the $900 range, which I would consider to be par for the course for these massive models. It does include the stand. It's an attractive stand. The stand is worth at least $200 to $300 in my opinion. So the models like this that are huge tend to sell for much lower values because the shipping costs and space considerations of where you're going to keep the model really weigh down the price, because not many people have the space, and the shipping costs are really exorbitant if you need to move one of these models any great distance. Typically, a model of this size is collected for by the buyer in person as opposed to tendered to a shipping company. You could be looking at $200, $300, $400, or several $100s to ship this model. So I would say the price was pretty accurate. Wasn't a smoking hot deal, but wasn't a bargain either. This is a Grumman Ov1 Mohawk. It's a plastic model. I believe the scale is 1/50th. It's a famous topping model. These are quite nice models. The detail's pretty good. I like the clear cockpit with the interior of the cockpit area visible. That's really cool. And this model appears to be in really quite nice shape. You have to bear in mind that the stand was not included in the listings, so there would be a discount for that. Now, this model sold on January the 11th of this year, 2022, and it achieved a price of $177. So I guess this is a pretty accurate valuation for this model. With the stand, I guess it would have been in the low 200s, which suggests to me that this particular model type might be rarer than some of the other topping models that are out there. Yeah, it looks neat, cool model. And the buyer probably got an average price for his investment in this model. This is quite a rare model. This was advertised by the seller as being a vintage metal Ghana Airways Handley Page Dart Herald, no base. Also, it's missing a prop. And if you look at the model, it is in rough shape. There are a lot of nicks and abrasions on the model. The tail actually has a lot of paint and decal loss as well. So I would consider the model to be about a 4 or 5 out of 10. And again, missing prop, missing stand. So you're going to have to add in at least $200 to $300 for a proper stand, unless you want to put this on a wire stand. And I don't know that that would look great, but a proper metal stand is a $200 to $300 investment. So, 400 pounds is $600, $700 plus the stand, $800, $900 for a model that's 4 out of 10. I would say, although it is rare, I would say it was probably on the very rich side for the buyer. I don't think that this model would easily trade hands at this price point outside of the eBay auction environment. So I think there was some heated bidding here, and I think somebody overpaid for this model. I think the model, if it would have been in beautiful shape without the stand, I could definitely see 400 pounds being reasonable. But again, just given with the amount of thrashing this model's been through, I think the buyer overpaid. So this is a bit of a different model. It's a resin Lockheed Constellation. It's in 1/50th scale, and the seller of the model held out that the model was probably a Lockheed factory model. Now, I was not aware that Lockheed made factory models of the Connie in resin, but if this is it, then this is it. The shape is pretty good. However, there is a break. One of the rear fins on the starboard side is broken off. Now, the seller did make very clear in his listing that a lot of the paint had bubbled up due to chemical reactions between the paint and the resin, which he stated was common with these models. Now, I do have a couple of issues with this model. Number one, it does have to be refinished in my opinion. Number two, it's obviously very fragile. So every time this model gets shipped, there is a risk of damage. And because the model has to be refinished, you've got an investment of refinishing, but then when you ship the model, you've got the risk of damage. So for me personally, I thought this model was a stay away from model, unless of course you are buying it to keep it in your collection with no thought to ever selling or trading it to another collector. just because of the massive risk involved in sending the model. The other risk is that you could finish the model, and when he came to paint the model, you could find yourself with a lot of chemical reactions, as Lockheed experienced themselves. So it's possible the model may not even be able to be refinished. So the model sold for $340 US on January the 16th of 2022. There was a $100 shipping fee. So you're into it for the mid fours. And I think that is absolutely top of price for this model, just given all the various caveats that any buyer has to be aware of. This model was made in the 1960s by the French manufacturer MEE, which stands for Maquette d'études d'exposition. And they were, of course, a very prevalent model maker back in the 1960s, making models for all the French airlines that operated caravels and many other companies as well on airlines. Their models are very beautiful. It's a plastic model, hollow model, no stand, and of course it does look great. The only problem is the starboard side rear stab is broken in two places quite badly and has been glued back in a fairly ugly fashion. So I would think that at the very least that it needs to be repaired. So either someone has to have the skill to make that repair, or will have to contract out to have the repair done. The model, because it's missing a stand, I think there's at least $100, $150 discount at play there. It is a really nice looking model. Otherwise, the condition is good. The model, it's a model I would like to have for my own collection, actually. It's actually just beautiful. And the price reflected that. The model sold on January the 19th for 800 euros. So call it almost $1,000 US. If it had the stand, it would be a $1,200 plus model. And if it was in metal, I think it would be double, at least $2,000. The Caravelle is a very popular aircraft, especially models that are accurate. It all comes down to how beautiful a model is. An ugly model, like the Connie that we saw earlier, gets a low price. Models that are absolutely drop-dead gorgeous, they get good prices. And this model is an excellent example of that phenomena. So this model is a 1/100 scale DC-10 in Caledonian Airways. The seller said it was made by Executive Display Models, so that's Brian Austria Tompkins from the Sheraton Skyline Hotel. Now, the model has a very obvious wing warp. The port side wing, even in this picture, if you look carefully, you can see the warble in that wing. And for me, I can't own a model that has a wing warp. Some collectors do and can, but again, this is a personal thing, and I can't have such a model in my collection. I don't consider Caledonian Airways the livery to be, I mean, it's a nice livery, but it's not mega rare. It's not up there in the collectability and rareness of, say, Ward Air or CP Air, in my personal opinion. I would value this model in the $200 to $300, $350 range, maybe $4 even, for the right collector. But this model achieved, unbelievably, 725 pounds on January the 19th, 2022. I think that is an absolute way overpayment for this model. I think that whoever bought the model will never be able to sell this model for anything close to that. So I would say this was a very poor investment, and I guess they really wanted to have it. But if it were me, I'd rather put the money into, for example, the Caravelle that we just saw, which was miles ahead of this model in terms of beauty and collectability and desirability. For the military collectors out there, this is quite a neat model. This is the large version of the B-58 Hustler made by Topping Precise Models. They made them in various sizes. There's a smaller version as well. This is the large version, which measures, apparently, according to the listing, 18 inches. I guess that would make it somewhere around 1/50th scale, but they also made one that was, I guess, 1/100 scale at roughly half the size as well, that looked identical. So yeah, this is harder to find than the smaller model for sure, and no damage actually as well. So it's quite an attractive model, and the buyer did, I think, par for the course. He or she paid $530 US plus shipping when this auction closed on January the 17th of 2022. I am not an expert on topping models. I've owned a few. I've wheeled and dealed in topping models. There are people that know a lot about these models, but it is my understanding that this particular one is, although it's a beautiful looking model, it's not mega rare either, but it is in great shape. So I think the seller did okay. I think the buyer did okay. And I think the buyer would be able to get his money back as well because he didn't overpay for the model. It's nice. So yeah, congratulations to the buyer. It's a nice piece. For future shows, I'd like to consider interviewing various collector friends that are out there where we talk about their models, their collections, their passions and interests in a live video environment, possibly on YouTube Live or some other platform where we'd be able to record it, share it with people at a later date, but also where we would be able to take live questions from the viewers. So if you have a collection of display models and this is something that you're interested in, please do contact me. You'll need to have an iPad-like device in order for us to record the show. And of course, you'll have to be open to showing pictures of your collection, perhaps through video or still images. So if this is something that's of interest to you, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to send your model shots to henry@aircraftdisplaymodels.com. I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my abilities as well, so don't hesitate to send them along. And if you're a model collector and you don't have my book, you might consider it. It's the Aircraft Display Model Collector, Investor, and Appraisal Guide. And there's a pop-out in the upper right-hand corner where you can learn more about my book as well. Incidentally, we are temporarily out of stock, and we're expecting the book back in stock within the next couple of months. But you can certainly place your order now, and we'll have it ready to go for when the books come back into stock. Thank you for watching the video. If you did like the video, please do not hesitate to give me a thumbs up. I appreciate your comments down below, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next edition as well. I have a few copies remaining of this limited edition Varig Lockheed Electra color photo book. You can get this book for free when you sign up for a 3-year subscription to JetFlix TV using the special promo code ELECTRA. This is a limited time offer. We have very few of these books left, but if you'd like to take advantage of not only the very lowest JetFlix TV subscription rates, you'll also get this book for free. Check it out. The link is in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll look forward to seeing you at JetFlix TV.